Thank you, John. That's great. What I'm going to talk about tonight is R&D, research and development of two kinds. Research and development is a design process exploiting information in the environment to create, maintain, and improve the design of things. And R&D always takes time and energy. And there are two main varieties. One is evolution by natural selection, and the other is human intelligent design. Notice, lowercase. There will not be a single word beyond this sentence about uppercase intelligent design in this talk tonight. The processes differ in several fundamental ways. First of all, evolution is purposeless. It's foresightless. It's extremely costly. Think of the billions, trillions of lives that are wasted on bad trials, and it's slow. Intelligent design is purposeful, somewhat foresighted, governed by cost considerations, and usually relatively fast. But there's more differences than that, and I'm going to explore a few of them. Evolution may be slow and costly, but it's brilliant. The late Francis Crick once had a joke about this, what he called Orgel's second rule, teasing his colleague Leslie Orgel, and that is, evolution is cleverer than you are. And anybody who's in evolutionary biology knows that very often, whether you're working at the molecular level or at the ecological level, you find some feature of some organism that seems, this is daft, this is stupid design, and then later you come to realize it's much more clever than you realized. It's actually more clever than you are. So that's Orgel's second rule. Now, intelligent design of the human sort now exists. We have lots of intelligent designers around, and it's becoming ever more intelligent with some surprising implications, and that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. On the left, we see a termite castle, an Australian termite castle. On the right, we see Gaudí's famous Sagrada Familia church in Barcelona. They are remarkably similar in shape and in construction, even inside. And yet, I propose, they are built and designed by profoundly different processes. The one on the left is built by termites who are, I hope I don't offend any termite lovers here, they're pretty clueless. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know why they're doing it. There is no architect termite or boss. There's a queen termite, but she's not really the boss. They're just mindlessly, cluelessly, uncomprehendingly doing their little thing, and this amazing castle arises. Gaudí, on the other hand, is almost a comic caricature of the creative genius, the megalomaniac, big boss, lording it over everybody, publishing manifestos, raising money with very grandiose gestures and all the rest. So you couldn't have a better contrast between Gaudí, the top-down intelligent designer, the genius, and the termites, the clueless bottom-up builders. So we have bottom-up design versus top-down design, and here's a puzzle. This is a real puzzle. A termite colony, I looked this up the other day, might have as many as 70 million clueless termites. And termite colonies can do some very clever things. Clever enough so that books have been written. That there's a book called The Soul of the White Ant, which some of you may have read, which suggests that a termite colony has a soul. Well, they do. They forage very intelligently. They're very efficient. They're very clever as a colony in many ways. But of course, you will have noticed they don't write poetry or make spaceships or things like that. 70 million clueless termites is not enough to give you a very great intelligence. A brain might be 200 billion clueless neurons, smaller but even more clueless. And now here's the question. How do you get a Gaudí-type mind out of a termite colony brain? If you think of your brain as a termite colony several orders of magnitude larger, you wonder, how can you get the kind of top-down intelligence that Gaudí exhibits out of a brain which is a very large collection of basically uncomprehending little single cells, neurons? Now, there's a short answer, and that's this. A friend of mine once said, you can't do much carpentry with your bare hands, and you can't do much thinking with your bare brain. That's very much to the point. So if you don't use your bare hands, what do you use? You use thinking tools. A termite colony is a bare brain. Doesn't have any thinking tools. Gaudí, on the other hand, had a well-equipped mind, equipped by eons, millennia of culture. Where did he get his tools? Well, the wrong answer comes from Freeman Dyson. Lovely man, great scientist, but he said this: technology is a gift of God. After the gift of life, it is perhaps the greatest of God's gifts. It is the mother of civilizations, of arts, and of sciences. I entirely approve of his honoring of technology, but I don't believe for a minute that he's got the source right. So that's the wrong answer, and here's the long answer. Cultural evolution. Cultural evolution in our species, and only in our species, designed thinking tools that now impose novel structures on our brains. Evolved virtual machines that then run on the basic underlying wetware of our neurons and glial cells. And it's that long answer that I'm now going to try to articulate a little bit more. A wonderful book. You'll see as I go along, this is a sort of book report talk. I'm going to be mentioning a number of books that I think very highly of. One of them is this book by John Maynard Smith, the late, great, one of my heroes, John Maynard Smith, and Earth Zatmari from Budapest, The Major Transitions in Evolution, published in '95. And in it, they describe how evolution evolves, how over the 3.5 billion years of evolution, there have been some profound transitions which change. It's like shifting gears. Evolution goes into a higher gear that can then explore design space more fruitfully, more efficiently. Here is their list. There's the eukaryotic revolution, about which a little bit more in a moment. Sex, you'll be happy to know, is one of the major transitions. Multicellularity, cell differentiation is another. And then language and human culture are the fourth and fifth, and which comes first is an open question, which I'm trying to close, but it's not easy. Now, I'm going to talk only about eukaryotic revolution and language and human culture because I want to point to a striking and surprising similarity between these two major transitions. This is my favorite diagram of the tree of life. Every living thing that has ever lived is represented in one way or another on this tree. And let's see, I think probably this outer edge here, you can see the arrow? Yeah. That's the present. So everything that's alive today is along this outer rim. Here are the mammals, and here are we way down here on this branch right here. This is the origin of life 3.5 billion years ago. And as you can see, first there were the bacteria, or the archaea. Len Eisenberg, whose tree of life this is, hedges his bets about whether the archaea are, as their name suggests, the first, but they may be, they may not be. We don't have to settle that. But for about 1 billion years, what we had was just these single-celled organisms, the so-called prokaryotes. And then something wonderful happens, and you can see it right there. It's where that great sudden turn happens. I'll find my pointer again. There it is. right about there, we get the great eukaryotic revolution. Everything else you see, all the colored things, those are all eukaryotes. We're eukaryotes. Basically, to a first approximation, every living thing that you can see with the naked eye is a eukaryote. Multicelled eukaryotic organism. So what is this great revolution? It's this. On the left, we see a simple prokaryote. On the right, we see a complicated eukaryote. Eu, as the prefix suggests, means good or better. They're bigger. They have more moving parts. They're much fancier. They're simply more versatile. They're bigger. All right, so how do we get from the simple cells on the left to the cell on the right? By an amazing thing that only had to happen once. One day, after 1 billion years or so of prokaryotes drifting around in the water, two different prokaryotes, not twins, two different prokaryotes with perhaps 2 billion years of independent R&D to create their particular powers, they bumped into each other. It's no doubt happened a lot. But on this occasion, instead of A eating B, engulfing B and using B for energy and parts, or B taking A apart from the inside, they joined forces in an endosymbiotic relationship. They became a new thing, an AB, and the AB thing was fitter than A or B by themselves. And so they proliferated, and they had a common fate. And they began to, their genomes began to merge, and that was the birth of the eukaryotic cell. And the great fossil trace of that, as everybody should know, is in the fact that eukaryotic cells have two, or actually more, two genomes. There's your nuclear genome, that's, for instance, your human DNA, and then there's your mitochondrial DNA. And the mitochondria are the descendants, the direct descendants of early prokaryotes that joined forces with other prokaryotes to form the eukaryotic cells. You get all your mitochondrial DNA from your mother, none from your father. So this is a great moment, this coming together, this chance collision, a moment of endosymbiosis, symbiosis, living together, endo because one's inside the other. And it was the late Lynn Margulis who first really drove that point home. She wasn't the one who invented the idea or first thought of it, but she's the one who persisted in spite of ridicule and much disagreement and disapproval, and she eventually won the case, and it's in all the textbooks now. So we owe a lot to Lynn for that wonderful campaign she fought on behalf of endosymbiosis. So what we have here is a great case of technology transfer. You've got two independent traditions of R&D, they come together and boom, you get this sudden explosion of competence that you didn't have before. Now, I want to describe another explosion, the MacCready Explosion. This was 10,000 years ago. Paul MacCready, the late Paul MacCready, was a Caltech engineer. Some of you probably know of him. He was the designer of the Gossamer Albatross, the human-powered plane that flew across the English Channel, very much into green environmental engineering. And he calculated that 10,000 years ago, that's just a twinkling ago in geological or biological time, the human population, this is at the dawn of agriculture, plus their livestock and pets, was less than 1%, maybe 0.1% of the terrestrial vertebrate biomass by weight. That is to say, of the animals. We're not including the insects or the worms, and we're not including the fish in the sea or any of the unicellular organisms. We're just including animals, basically, terrestrial vertebrates. And 10,000 years ago, less than 1%. What do you suppose the percentage is today? Rather more. Would anybody hazard a guess? 10%. Anybody think it might be higher than 10? I heard 99. No. 98. Well, where is it? There it is. 98% by his cut. Maybe by now it's 99. Paul MacCready made this a few years ago. We and most of that is cattle, by the way. We have engulfed the planet in one of the most remarkable transitions ever. And it's happened in the last 10,000 years, in a twinkling. Faster than the Cambrian explosion. This is the fastest and most dramatic change in life forms. Well, maybe some of the great extinctions would be viable candidates for just as for similarly sudden changes to the biosphere. What is responsible for it? Well, he has a wonderful thing to say about it. He says, over billions of years, on a unique sphere, chance has painted a thin covering of life, complex, improbable, wonderful, and fragile. Suddenly, we humans have grown in population, technology, and intelligence to a position of terrible power. We now wield the paintbrush. And our genes are just the same as the genes of people 100,000 years ago. A few important differences, but not many genetic differences between us and our ancestors going back even a few 100,000 years. But look at what's changed. Technology and intelligence is the key, just as Freeman Dyson said. So this was another great technology transfer, and I'm going to put it in sort of deliberately dramatic terms. The invasion of human brains by symbiotic thinking tools. Memes. Richard Dawkins' memes from The Selfish Gene. Now, I know that a lot of people have a visceral dislike of the idea of memes. And I have been fending off second-rate and third-rate objections to memes now for 20 years and more. And there are even a few almost first-rate objections, which I will be dealing with summarily in my next book. I'm here to tell you, memes are okay. And they really do some wonderful work. I'm going to give you a sketch of some of the work that they do and show you why you should, if you think memes are a bad idea, you might want to change your mind. These thinking tools, we don't inherit them via our genes. They're not instincts. We're not born with them. We don't have to design them ourselves. Nobody in this room had to design calculus or long division or alphabetization or language or the wheel. We acquire these in our culture, in our education, in growing up and learning. We don't have to design them ourselves. And here's the really important point. Nobody has to design them. Any more than anybody has to design the nightingale or the palm tree. They are products of an R&D process of cultural evolution. Not genetic evolution, but cultural evolution, which is very much like evolution by natural selection of genes, but in this case we're talking about the evolution of memes. Now, the MacCready explosion was an explosive amplification of human competence. That's just obvious. It was competence largely without comprehension in the early days. It's only recently, very recently, in many regards, only in the last 100 years or less, that we've really come to understand what the heck happened and to understand a lot of the tools that we're using. Nevertheless, it happened thanks to those tools. And this competence without comprehension has evolved into competence with comprehension. And this is what I like to call the Darwinian strange inversion reinverted. One of my favorite passages of criticism of Darwin was written by a man named Robert Beverly Mackenzie in 1868. I love this passage because the passion of it, the capital letters are in the original. And here's what Mackenzie had to say. In the theory with which we have to deal, absolute ignorance is the artificer, so that we may enunciate as the fundamental principle of the whole system that in order to make a perfect and beautiful machine, it is not requisite to know how to make it. This proposition will be found, on careful examination, to express in condensed form the essential purport of the theory, and to express in a few words all Mr. Darwin's meaning, who, by a strange inversion of reasoning, seems to think absolute ignorance fully qualified to take the place of absolute wisdom in all the achievements of creative skill. Exactly. That's it. That's just what Darwin showed. And it's a strange inversion of reasoning. It's still strange. To many people, they have a hard time getting their head around this. How could absolute ignorance do all this brilliant design work? So here's Darwin's strange inversion of reasoning according to Mackenzie. In order to make a perfect and beautiful machine, it's not requisite to know how to make it. Now I'm going to talk about Turing and his strange inversion. You'll notice a similarity. In order to be a perfect and beautiful computing machine, it is not requisite to know what arithmetic is. Darwin and Turing. Before Turing, computers were people. Intelligent people. They probably read maths in university, out of work. They would work doing computation. What are you? I'm a computer. I work for such and such a company doing computation. And what Turing realized was that wasn't necessary. He could boil all the comprehension out and give you just basic, minimalistic, no comprehension at all, and he could get arithmetic. And if you've got arithmetic and conditional branching, it's off to the races. You can compute anything. That's what Turing showed. So what Darwin and Turing showed, and this is a strange inversion, is competence without comprehension. The process of natural selection doesn't understand anything and doesn't have to. Similarly, the CPU on your computer doesn't have to understand anything. And yet they're both remarkably competent processes that can build and build and build and do more and more R&D. And this bottom-up R&D is what we've seen ever since. In other words, mind or consciousness or understanding is not the cause, the first cause, it's an effect, and a very recent effect. Now, termites are not intelligent designers. Beavers are not very intelligent designers. We are the first intelligent designers in the tree of life. And we're way over there. That's about 6 million years, that little Y, that little fork. And so intelligent design starts in one species about there. And that's the first intelligent design since life started on the planet. A term of mine, which I wish I could recoin and do otherwise, because a lot of people don't like this term, it gives them the willies or something, heebie-jeebies, is free-floating rationales. What's a free-floating rationale? It's a reason why something is the way it is, but it's nobody's reason. Trees do things for reasons, as any botanist can explain to you. Fungi do things for reasons. The biotic world is saturated with reasons from the molecular scale on up. And we do things for reasons. We shiver, we vomit, we blink. They're not our reasons, they are the reasons why we do them. We don't have to know them. We do not have to comprehend these reasons for these to be the reasons that we're acting as we do. And we even also choose and decide and act for reasons that we don't need to appreciate. I'm going to give you an animal example and suggest that although it looks at first strikingly unlike what we human beings do, it's not that different. Stotting. You've probably seen David Attenborough film or some such nature documentary where you see these preposterous wild high leaps that the gazelles do when they're being chased by, say, lions in Africa. It's called stotting. Why do they do it? It looks risky, it looks dangerous, it looks show-offy. What's going on? Well, we now have a very good idea what the reason is, why they do it. This is the free-floating rationale of this particular behavior. It's sending a signal, don't bother chasing me, I can make these energetically expensive leaps and still outrun you. Go after my cousin who can't. It's a vivid case of what's known as costly signaling theory. And it has to be costly, otherwise it wouldn't be credible. If all the animals could do it, the lion would be wise not to believe. But the lion does believe this communicative act and doesn't chase the gazelles that can stot. So it's serving a purpose. It is transferring information from the gazelle to the lion. They both benefit. It's a stable system. But here's the important thing. Neither the gazelle nor the lion needs to understand this signal, this speech act. As far as the gazelle is concerned, it doesn't know why it wants to throw these ridiculous leaps. It just does. It gets a great urge, if it can, to throw those leaps, and it does. It's the beneficiary of this clever stratagem without understanding it at all. And similarly, the lion doesn't have to figure out, oh, the ones that can leap must be faster and they're showing off to me. No, don't put soliloquies like that in the lion's head. If you want to put a monologue in the lion's head, the lion is just thinking, oh, I don't want to chase those guys. I don't know why, but they're just not attractive somehow. I'll go for the ones that don't do those leaps. They don't have to understand. The system works anyway. Hint. A lot more of human communication is like stotting than tradition would have it. And a lot of animal communication is exactly like stotting. This is competence without much comprehension because you don't really have to comprehend. And it's a good thing that we can have examples of meaning and communication without comprehension, because if we're doing neuroscience, we got a lot of signaling going on in the neurons between the eyes and the lateral geniculate nucleus and V1 and V2 and all of these different areas of the brain. All these signals are being sent, and the neurons don't have to understand any of it. But there are reasons why they're doing what they're doing, and information is being transmitted, but it's just not being comprehended by the receivers. It doesn't have to be. So the problem that cultural evolution solves is how we get a Gaudí mind out of a termite colony brain. How do we get intelligent design with representation of the reasons? Gaudí's type of intelligent design, or Turing's type of intelligent design, out of 200 billion mindless neurons. It was the second great endosymbiotic revolution. It's human culture, we are apes with infected brains. Our brains, from the day we're born, in fact, even before we're born, already memes are entering our brains through our ears and through our eyes and taking up residence and building novel virtual machines, thinking tools in our brains that change the functional architecture of our brains. Viruses are not alive. They don't have a metabolism. Basically, they are just strings of nucleic acid with attitude. That is to say, thanks to their sequence, they have a shape, and thanks to their shape, they have an amazing competence, without any comprehension at all, to infiltrate into cells and trick those cells into making copies of them instead of their own genetic material. That's how viruses replicate. And of course, evolution of viruses is classic evolution by natural selection. Being alive is thus not a requirement for evolution by natural selection, because viruses aren't alive, and they sure do evolve. The evolution of HIV, since it was first sequenced, has involved more change than the human genome has changed since we parted company from our common ancestor with the chimpanzee. Well, you might say, but how about being a material thing? Is that necessary? Is that necessarily a requirement for evolution? Maybe not being alive, but certainly you have to be a material thing. And the answer is no, you don't. Viruses depend on living cells to reproduce. Memes, which are informational things, depend on living brains to reproduce. And they're not made out of anything except information. This is a hard point for many people to accept, and some people, some very smart and clever, sophisticated people are not happy with this line of mine, but I'm going to present it to you and try to defend it. First of all, I want to point out this is not dualism. Or if it is, then the hardware-software distinction is dualism. But of course, it's not in any bad sense. It's a perfectly respectable dualism. How many of you believe in the existence of software? Yeah. I mean, what, is Bill Gates a fraud? How did he make his money? He sold software. Was it valuable? Yes. Does it exist? Of course. What is it made of? Bits. That's what it's made of. Here's another book I recommend highly. Peter Godfrey Smith, Philosopher of Biology. Was at Harvard, now he's at NYU. Darwinian Populations and Natural Selection, Oxford University Press, 2009. In this book, Peter introduces something that he calls Darwinian spaces. And I've come to think of this as one of my favorite new thinking tools. I didn't put it in intuition pumps because I would have had to do too much teaching on the side about evolutionary biology, and I thought, well, I'll save that. I'll use these and introduce them in the next book. So let me see if I can characterize this. This is just a three space of a sort that you see in many different scientific graphs. And the thing is, you can take any three properties in which there's variation in living phenomena, and put them on the three axes, X, Y, and Z, Z for you, and just consider all the other dimensions fixed at some neutral vanilla value, or however you want. We look at 3 dimensions at a time, and we can pick and choose what dimensions we put. And then we can look at comparing phenomena in this space to see how Darwinian they are. Because one of the lessons of Darwinism is you want to be a Darwinian about Darwinism and recognize that it doesn't have an essence. There isn't just one sort of Darwinism. There's all sorts of sort of Darwinian phenomena that are almost Darwinian, rather Darwinian. It's rather like the transition from therapsids to mammals. You got a lot of creatures that are neither obviously mammals nor obviously therapsids, who are the ancestors of mammals. Perfectly good living creatures, they just didn't fit into those pigeonholes well. They were neither mammals nor therapsids, or maybe they were both. Don't even worry about it, you don't have to draw the line. Similarly, we should look for there to be Darwinian phenomena which are only sorta Darwinian. And you'll see in these diagrams, the paradigm is up here at 1, 1, 1. Full doses of all 3 dimensions. That's the way he draws these diagrams. So we have the 0 point, and the dimensions he put up here, this is his first one, are sort of standard. As everybody knows, I hope, you have to have very high fidelity replication in the genes to sustain evolution. If the replication if errors accumulate too fast, then evolution stops. That's known as the error catastrophe. But it can't be perfect. If the fidelity of replication of genetic material was perfect, then you'd have no mutations, and evolution would have come to a stop. So in the parade cases of evolution, you've got to have you have to be very high on the H scale, the heredity fidelity scale, but not all the way to perfection. This is, if you want to have a naturalistic meaning of original sin, that should be it. The S dimension, dependency of realized fitness differences on intrinsic properties, is best understood as a contrast. Let's look at something that is selected for a non-intrinsic property. Right now in this room, if we held a like a tennis tournament, an elimination tournament, a coin flipping tournament, somebody would win the tournament. But it would not be, as it were, for an intrinsic property. They'd just be lucky. And that would mean that there'd be no reason to think that on the very next coin flip, they'd be any more likely to win than anybody else, right? Well, there are many extrinsic properties. One of the most interesting is the realtor's favorite, location, location, location. And that's why Godfrey Smith has put human cells up here. They're selected, there's very high fidelity of replication of the genetic material in human cells. Basically, all the cells in your body have the same genome. There's some mutations that do occur. And you have also a smoothness of fitness landscape. I'll get to that in just a moment. But the main thing is that, for instance, in embryonic development, you have many more neurons born than are going to survive. The ones that are in the right place at the right time make the connections. They survive. The other ones get selected out, and their materials are reused for the next generation in embryonic development. So it's a very Darwinian process, but it isn't perfectly Darwinian. It isn't the full-fledged parade case because you don't have selection for cause. You have selection for an extrinsic property, location. Even though the neurons themselves may all be alike, the one that happens to be in just the right place is the one that survives. I won't bother talking about the other dimension there. It's smoothness of fitness landscape. If you have a rugged fitness landscape, then evolution is hard because small steps in any direction may simply throw you off a cliff instead of slightly higher up the hill to the summit of fitness space. If you understand what a fitness landscape is. So we'll move on. This is one of my applications of PGS's, Peter Godfrey Smith's spaces. And I want to look at the origin of life, just very swiftly. Up in the upper right-hand corner, we have the Darwinian case of bacteria. They evolve by genuinely Darwinian means because they replicate. But before you have bacteria, or whatever the first living forms were, you don't have replication. And a lot of people, skeptics, origin of life skeptics, say, well, there has to be a miracle. No, because you have all these quasi-Darwinian processes which can make the probability of getting to a replicator much more likely. You have differential persistence versus differential reproduction. Some processes, prebiotic, abiotic processes, simply outlast others, more stable, and since they're outlasting them, they can gather what are like mutations, and hence this can change. That can change the probability, the odds of other things happening. When you have thousands of asynchronous cycles all working together, this keeps generating novelty, generating new combinations, and in the fullness of time, you get bacteria. Nobody knows how to fill this space in time. We start in an abiotic world, and some trajectory takes us up there to the Darwinian case. We don't know what it is, but we sort of know some of the dimensions that have to be moved through. Whether a membrane comes first or whether reproduction or metabolism comes first, you've got to have all three by the time you get to bacteria, but the order in which they come is very much up for grabs. Now, here we get to the one that matters. Here's my main diagram of cultural evolution. And you'll see that I've put the termite castle down here. This is 0, 0, 0, but now I've inverted Darwin's inversion, and I put the pure Darwinian case down in this corner, where it's bottom up, no comprehension, and where the search in the space is essentially random. It's not directed search at all. There's no information used. It's this coin flip search, what you search. So this is our pure Darwinian case, the termite castle culture, and up here, in this corner is intelligent design. And what I'm suggesting is that cultural evolution over thousands of years, but not millions, only thousands of years, has moved from very Darwinian to very intelligent design. We are now living in the age of intelligent design of culture. So we want to look at this de-Darwinizing of cultural evolution from the first beginnings of, for instance, language. And that's why we see the termite castle down at the bottom, and why I've put up in the intelligent design corner, you'll notice I've put Picasso's name. Why did I put Picasso there? Not because I think he's the smartest, most intelligent designer ever, but because he said he was. Je ne cherche pas, je trouve. This is a brilliant lie. Balderdash, to use a polite word. He did a lot of searching in order to find. I don't search, I find. Notice what he's saying is, not for me, random search, not for me, grubby trial and error. I just leap to the highest peak in the design space every time. I comprehend perfectly. Nothing hemi-semi about me. I am at the very pinnacle. I am an intelligent designer. Well, this je ne cherche pas, je trouve is a perfect motto for the intelligent designer. But, as I say, it's never realized. It certainly wasn't realized by Picasso. He was a very clever dude. I think a lot of his intelligence was that although he did a lot of searching, made sometimes hundreds of sketches, his brilliance was signing and selling the sketches along with the finished product. So Picasso couldn't meet that, but he can serve as emblematic of that extreme position on the graph. I want to thank Matt Ridley, my friend Matt Ridley, for this wonderful slide. Two cultural artifacts. On the left, you have an Acheulean hand axe. On the right, you have the mouse, of course. Two products of human culture. Nobody invented the Acheulean hand axe. Nobody. Douglas Engelbart invented the mouse. The hand axe was used with hardly any changes at all for close to 1 million years. There are different theories about what it was exactly for. My favorite is that it was the human artificer's version of the peacock's tail. That basically you are saying, this is costly signaling, I am so good, you say this to the ladies, that I can make all these hand axes and still stay alive. Either I'm very good at making hand axes, or I'm very good at stealing hand axes. I got a lot of you want to come up and see my hand axes? This was actually, it was Merrick Cohen's idea that the Acheulean hand axe was a bit of costly signaling. And there's one particularly interesting datum in its favor, and that is that troves of these have been found, dozens, never used, all together in a pile, a little treasure pile of Acheulean hand axes, lovingly crafted, never used for anything. So maybe that was, come up and see my hand axes. We don't know. But in any case, that was an example of sort of above the termite, but long, way down low on the scale. Norbert Wiener, who is the youngest and perhaps the most famous graduate of my university, Tufts University, the founder of cybernetics, the coiner of the term cybernetics, once said, information is information, not matter or energy. No materialism that does not admit this can survive at the present day. And I want to underline that. I think he's exactly right. As I say, information is not matter or energy, it's information, and we've got to take it seriously. And I want to look at some things made of information. Habits. Words. Poems, songs, jokes, games, Sudoku, crossword puzzles. Techniques. Dead reckoning, surveying, long division, Bayesian statistics, PCR. And software. These are all things made of information. And I want to point out, only the software is made of bits. I'm not talking about bits when I'm talking about information. I'm talking about information in a more fundamental sense. Shannon information measured in bits is a recent and very important refinement of one concept of information, but it's not the concept I'm talking about. I'm talking about the concept of information where when one chimpanzee learns how to crack nuts by watching his mother crack nuts, there's information passed from mother to offspring, and that is not in bits. That is an informational transfer that is not accomplished in any Shannon channel that is worth talking about. So habits, I've just mentioned one. Chimpanzees learning. I put this slide in because I want to acknowledge that, yes, we're not the only species with culture. Arguably, whales have 2 or 3 or 7 items of culture, and chimpanzees have maybe a dozen culturally transmitted habits that are not in the genome. But nothing goes explosive, nothing goes combinatorial except in our species. We're the ones where culture really takes off. So now let's look at words. In the beginning, we had what I want to call synanthropic words. Synanthropic species are species that evolved by natural selection, but are not domesticated. We don't own them, but they are synanthropos. They are with us, human beings. So synanthropic species would include mice and rats and pigeons and bedbugs and body lice. We don't own them, we don't domesticate them, but they are evolved to live and thrive in our company. Barn swallows, chimney swifts, birds. And the first words, I argue, were synanthropic words. The people that were infested with these didn't know what they were doing, they didn't know they were talking, they weren't even really paying attention to what was happening, but words were beginning to take up residence in their world and move from head to head via mouth and ear, and this was the birth of language. There's a long story to be told about how that all works out. I'm not going into that tonight because I'm just giving you the bird's eye view. Then we move into a period where we have domesticated words. These are not just species of meme that thrive in human company, but we're beginning to pay attention to controlling their replication, which is usually the standard mark of domestication. If you control the reproduction of a species for your own purposes, then you've domesticated that species. So we have domesticated words, then we have coined words, which is a little bit like genetically engineered organisms. These are invented by, they have particular authors. Meme, of course, is a good example of a coined meme. Dawkins is the coiner. Not one word in 10,000 in our vocabulary is a coined word. Most of the words have no authors, no creators at all. They are products of cultural evolution. And then we get technical terms, which takes it up even a notch further. And then we finally get to internet memes. And when I put this up here, I know some of my students and others, they suddenly think, aha, now you're in the trouble. You're in the soup now, Dennett. Why? Because they think this is just the reductio ad absurdum of Dawkins' concept of memes. Dawkins introduced memes to be evolvers, to be things that evolve by natural selection. But internet memes are the creations, the creations of presumably intelligent designers. There's competitions on the internet. Who can design the meme that goes viral best? So this would seem to be the very, an intelligently designed meme would seem to be a contradiction in terms. And I admit, for a while, I thought so too. And I deplored the fact that Dawkins' wonderful word and concept was being sullied, was being cheapened by being transformed in this way into the word it is on the internet. And then I suddenly realized, no. Maybe this is a contradiction in terms. So what? After all, a splittable atom is also a contradiction in terms. The word atom initially meant unsplittable thing, a thing without parts. a complete unit without any parts at all. Now we have splittable atoms. The very idea of subatomic particles was a contradiction in terms when it was first introduced, but we went along with it. We kept the term, and we understood that it was in a certain sense misnamed, or we had a richer interpretation of what atoms were. Same thing is true of memes. What we should realize is that the original memes, down in the bottom layer, when human cultural evolution was very Darwinian, they were pretty much exactly what Dawkins said they were. And they've since become more and more intelligently designed, more and more domesticated, to where we now have memes. We'll still call them that, even though they're not products of Darwinian natural selection, they're products of intelligent design. It reminds me, of course, of an earlier contradiction, and that was Darwin's, the very one that Mackenzie pointed out. The very idea, we've reinverted Darwin's strange inversion. Cui bono, from the law, who benefits, is a question that evolutionary biologists should always ask themselves. And we talk about three kinds of symbionts in biology: mutualists that do good for us, commensals, and parasites. Only the parasites are bad for our fitness reducing. And as you probably know, there's actually trillions of symbionts in your body right now that you couldn't live without. They're mutualists. They're the flora in your gut and so forth. And there are actually trillions more of viruses which are not doing you any harm. All those symbionts. Well, the same is true of memes. There are mutualists, commensals, and parasites. And one of the key insights of memetics, this is, I think, the key insight of memetics, is that meme evolution creates adaptations that enhance the fitness of memes independently of whether it enhances our fitness. Human fitness is not the end-all and be-all that it is that species fitness is in other species. How many of you think that having more grandchildren than anybody else is the most important thing in life? I don't see any hands. In other words, unlike every other species on the planet, you have things that you think are more important. That's because your head is full of memes. If it weren't, you would be like every other living thing on the planet, and all of your energies would be for having more offspring. What do you see? Say it. But now look more closely, and you'll notice that the H and the A are exactly the same shape. You've unconsciously corrected those shapes in your mind. That's an example of simple digitization. You're correcting to the norm. And you're doing it because you have a system. That, of course, is written language. I want to point out that the same feature is in spoken language, in words spoken. So we're going to have a little experiment. So I want you to listen carefully and repeat after me. Mundify the epigastrium. Again. Once more. Perfect. Do you know what it means? No. You don't care. Second case. Again, listen carefully. Repeat after me. And again. Now do it a third time. You can't do it. There was just as much energy. The rise and fall of the graph was as striking in the third case as in the first. But you didn't have the EVM, the English virtual machine, in your brain, which automatically corrected to the norm by identifying the phonemes. That is digitization. It is exactly the same trick that is used in computers to give them high fidelity transmission. It's exactly the same trick that's used in DNA. Phonemes are one of evolution's greatest inventions, right up there with DNA, which is a four-member alphabet, A, C, G, and T. And phonemes are remarkably unreal, if you know about the physics of phonology. They don't correspond to any simple physical properties. They're like benign illusions that are generated in your head by the machinery you have in your brain. Boyd and Richerson, a wonderful book, another wonderful book, not by genes alone, is very good on the early days, the bottom level of my diagram of cultural evolution. They concentrate on how cultural evolution starts with minimally comprehending vectors. They have a very simple rule like copy the successful, and it generates interesting results. So they're very good on the early days, how to get cultural evolution up and running against many countervailing forces in evolution. So it's competence with minimal comprehension, leading to a little bit of myopic comprehension. But now we want to move beyond that. In between, we have every degree and combination of semi-insightful tinkering. One of my favorite examples is the Polynesian canoe. In a wonderful article by Rogers and Ehrlich about how the Polynesian canoe evolved over time, they quote a Frenchman. Actually, he was writing not about Polynesian canoes, I've learned, but about Brittany fishing vessels. Every boat is copied from another boat. Let's reason as follows in the manner of Darwin. It's clear that a very badly made boat will end up in the bottom after 1 or 2 voyages, thus never be copied. One could then say with complete rigor that it is the sea herself who fashions the boats, choosing those which function and destroying the others. If it comes back, copy it. That's natural selection. Doesn't require any particular comprehension. You don't have to be a naval architect. You follow that rule, and the boats are going to gradually get better. You may make some mutations. Most of your mutations may make worse boats. Doesn't matter. Any that happen to make better boats, that will be copied, and so forth. So we put the Polynesian canoe sort of in the middle of the diagram. Interesting to note that what I'll call the economic model of culture is up in the top layers. Our standard traditional idea of human culture is that it consists of treasures that are made by the most creative, genius people. We honor them, we preserve them, we spend money protecting them, they're the legacy we pass on to the next generation. This is sort of high culture, and it's an economic model. These are goods. But human culture has a lot of other things in it which are not necessarily goods at all. They're just features. They're not particularly prized, but they survive and mutate and they travel along anyway. Those are the synanthropic cultural elements, for instance. Okay. In the middle, we've got what I call Foible exploiters. Competences with limited comprehension provided by mechanisms that are good enough for government work, as one says, that have characteristic foibles and falling short that can then be exploited in arms races. And that's what we see in the world of human culture. Scams, pyramid schemes are 2 obvious examples. It's a quasi-Darwinian process. So we're now in the age of intelligent design. Cultural evolution has become ever more top-down, ever more comprehending and self-comprehending, ever more refined in its search methods. So has genetic evolution, thanks to genetically modified foods and Craig Venter, and genetic engineering in general is very much a matter of intelligent design of genes. But I want to end by pointing to the age that we're now entering, the age of post-intelligent design. In many fields, intelligent designers are exploiting the truth of Orgel's second rule. Remember, evolution is cleverer than you are? It turns out that we can now harness evolution to do a lot of the design work for us. Genetic algorithms were the first area in which that happened. You probably use a computer device which is optimized by genetic algorithms. Deep learning, the current bandwagon in artificial intelligence is a good example of this. Evolutionary architecture, I'm going to show you an example, and some evolutionary approaches to nanotechnology. The Ottawa House of Commons has a roof, this sort of sunroof, which was intelligently designed by John Sullivan at MIT using evolutionary architecture. These are a few slides from one of his presentations. So we have a fitness landscape. There's one building and you see it in the space, and then he tests them in various ways for efficiency, use of energy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's another one, and there's another one. And out of this selection comes the best design. And it's better than he can do without using evolution. I'm going to end on this nice note. Frances Arnold, one of my heroes, one of my heroines, won the first Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering in 2013. She's a Caltech bioengineer. And here's what she does. She evolves proteins that have never existed before on the planet. When one of her supervisors, when she was a graduate student, said, "But Frances, there's no protein in nature that has the competences that you're hoping to put into these proteins." She says, "That's because there's never been selection for that." So she's creating new selection pressures in the lab and evolving proteins by really quite classic evolution. And as she says, consequently, these enzymes may open up whole new regions of chemical space that could not be explored in previous medical chemistry efforts. We're developing new tools for protein engineering and using them to create new and improved catalysts for carbon fixation, sugar release from renewable polymers such as cellulose, biosynthesis of fuels and chemicals. So the age of post-intelligent design, of evolutionary design, is now upon us. Thank you very much for your attention.
If you look back at the Daniel Dennett of 1 Beaumont Street in 1964 and the evolution of your thinking since then, what are the 2 or 3 ideas that have taken you out of what would have been a smooth evolution of thought?